Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yekel Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org.
Some people feel the white lily is associated with Easter because the bulb in the pot represents Christ in the tomb, the green stem represents new life or the resurrection, and the white flower represents the glorified Savior. Other people feel the white Easter lily is a sure sign of spring, just like the first robin or the tulips coming out of the ground. I'm Mary Holm, and come along with Prairie Yard and Garden today as we learn how Easter lilies and other spring holiday flowers are grown just for us to enjoy. Easter is one of my family's favorite holidays. Our kids love the hunt for eggs and candy, while I love the beautiful flowers that are such a part of this spring season. Come along as we visit with Chris Burgeon of Burgeon's Greenhouses to learn just how these spring holiday flowers are grown. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thanks for coming to join us today.
Well, I'm really looking forward to finding out a lot about growing these beautiful plants. Tell us about your background. How did you get started in the industry?
Well, this is a family business, so I kind of grew up in the business and grew up in the greenhouse. I worked here in high school. 25 years ago, I graduated from NDSU, came back in the business. I've held just about every position in the business and done just about everything. And so that's kind of where we are today. We have a colorful history. This business actually started in 1921. My great-grandmother and her two sons, my grandpa and his brother, started building some greenhouses, and that's how this whole thing got started nearly 95 years ago today.
How many greenhouses or how many acres do you have in production?
We own 3 facilities, growing facilities today. One is here in Detroit Lakes. This is kind of our home base. We have a place in Minneapolis, and we also have a location in Park Rapids. So 3 locations. This is 12 acres. We're 14 in the cities and 12 acres in Park Rapids again. So quite a bit of space.
How many Easter lilies do you grow?
250,000. That's a lot of lilies.
It is. Do you get those in as bulbs then and pot them up yourself? Or tell us about how you start producing them.
Well, it's a process it's a very long process. The bulbs are harvested in an area of the country on the very coastal edge of Oregon. It's a very small little piece of land that all the lilies in the country actually come from. The bulbs themselves come in, they're dug, they're packaged, we'll get them. We have a very short window that we pot them up. We'll go through a rooting process, and then we'll go through 1,000 hours of vernalization at 42 degrees. Then they'll come in the greenhouse for about 125 days of greenhouse forcing to meet Easter Sunday flowering times. So it's a very precise process.
Well, that's what I wondered. An Easter lily isn't worth a hoot the day after Easter.
Yep.
So how do you time them in order to get them to grow and bloom at the right time?
So technically, this is like our most difficult thing we do because Easter floats over a month's period. It's not like Valentine's Day that's the same, February 14th every year. Easter can fluctuate a month's time. And so the bulbs can only be dug at one time. They can't be dug early. They can't be packaged early. And so we really have to slow the process down in the greenhouse or speed it up as much as we can depending on the date of Easter.
Okay, and then how big are the bulbs when they come in?
Well, they're different sizes, and different sizes or different grades to meet potentially different outcomes. So the bulb size that we predominantly use is called an 8-9. It's a real top size bulb, and that we think has the greatest potential of delivering a consistent 5 or 6 bloom plant. And so we kind of, what's a quality Easter lily for us? It's a 5 bloom and up. And certainly in a lot of years we can coax 8 or 9 or 10 blooms out of them. But we're really kind of shooting for a bottom line of 5, which we usually do with no trouble.
That's what I was going to ask, is how do you know which bulbs will produce how many blooms?
Well, it's basically by size. And so an 8-9 bulb is about the size of a baseball. A 9-10 is approaching the size of a small softball, and right down to like a 7, which would be like a large golf ball. And so consistent bulb quality has a big impact on the outcome of the plant. So part of it is bulb size, and the other part is environment, growing environment when we're forcing the bulbs.
Then I've sometimes seen that there's some lilies that will have 2 stems in the same pot. What causes something like that?
Well, sometimes there's double nosing of the bulbs, and so the bulbs will actually have 2 noses, and it's really not apparent when you're planting them, but they'll come up that way. Some years it's maybe a couple, 3 or 4%, possibly. Other years it's like 0.5%, so it kind of varies by year. I don't see too many of them out there this year. In bigger sizes, we'll plant like 2 or 3 bulbs in a plant, to get a larger display. Just different sizes for different markets.
Then how often do you have to fertilize the plants, and how often do you have to water?
Well, in the beginning, when we're starting the forcing stages, it's late December and early January. It's very dark out. We have very light solar transmission through the greenhouses, and we may only water once every 10 days. Now, kind of at the end of the process, we're watering every day. Lilies, by nature, especially early in the production cycle, are very heavy feeders. So we're feeding at 400 to 500 parts per million nitrogen, to drive some nutrition into that bulb. At the end, we're pretty much just on straight water. We really dial it back. So it depends on where in the stage we are, as far as how much we're watering and concentrations of fertilizer and nutrition in the water.
Are there any insects and diseases that you have to watch out for growing the lilies?
Again, this will depend on where we are in the production cycle. In the beginning, things like shore flies and fungus gnats drive us crazy. At the very end, we're kind of watchful for aphids. But, because we're in an environment where it's 10 below outside, we don't have anything coming into the greenhouse, so we're mainly concerned with just getting cleaned up inside and remaining clean.
Most homeowners don't want a lily that's going to be too terribly tall. How do you control the height on those lilies?
A lot of it has to do with environment. The best lilies are produced where the temperature really never goes below 60, and the top end of the temperature really never goes above 70. Now that's really easy to do on a late Easter, but an early Easter like this year is very difficult to do. So our ideal plant would be something in the 18 to 20 inch size range, and with that we can manipulate the environment, but we also use some chemical growth regulators to keep ensure a little more compact growth in the plant.
Now you're going to laugh about this, but Tom and I, when we would pick out our Easter lilies when we had the greenhouse, we'd always bring his jackknife along, and if the bloom buds were 3/4 of the size of his jackknife, they would bloom for us for Easter. We always came about 19 to 21 days before Easter,
Yep.
and we would use this as our sizing. I bet
Nothing
you,
has changed.
Oh.
We don't use a jackknife, but we have a thing called a bud meter. But in essence, all it is really just a marked line. And at 65 or 68 degrees average daily temperature, if you've got a 1-inch bud, it's about 20 days out. And so really, you and Tom weren't too far off on the jackknife story, because I can see you're holding your finger at about a 1-inch mark. 20 days, 70 degrees, should be no trouble.
Okay.
Now we can speed that up, and we're going to go in the greenhouse later, I think, and you're going to see that we're running a little bit warmer. It's because we're trying to push and make every one. The other problem with Easter lilies, the other challenge is they're not like F1 hybrid petunias or violas. They will flower over one pot to the next, a 3 or 4 week window. Well, Easter is only one day, and so try to morphing that crop in to hit a specific ship week, or a big week of shipping is trouble, because some are coming on too early and some are lagging, and the name of the game is we need to make every one.
Where do you all sell your plants to?
We have a broad base of customers, and actually we're growing 250,000 Easter lilies. We ship to a large area. A lot of our plants this year are going to end up in Nevada and Georgia and California, as well as the tri-state local market. So supermarket floral, supermarkets, chain stores, individual flower shops, A lot of these folks are our very best customers.
How do you prepare the plants for shipping, or how do you ship them?
A lot of the stuff will go through distribution centers, the Easter lilies will, and so we'll bring them to a certain point where our customers will distribute them to their stores. Otherwise, we'll be delivering direct to store. We ship all of our own material on our own trucks. And so either they'll go on racks like are behind you, Mary, or we'll have them cased in cases, and that's how they'll go out. Well, it's a fairly labor-intensive process. Here, because lilies, like I mentioned, come on a little earlier or a little bit later, we're selecting for a certain grade every time we pull. So if it's something for a customer that's requesting them fairly tight or immature, we'll pick a different plant than maybe another customer. All of our packaging is customer dependent, so our customers would have specific requests or requirements for that packaging. Some will go in hand wrap, some will go in foil, some will go in pot covers, some will go in wicker, some will go in ceramic, some will go in cases, some will go direct to store on carts. So it all varies a little bit. But we're picking, that material, for that customer for that ship week. And with lilies, it really comes down to a pretty crunch time in shipping. And so, for instance, this Saturday, I know our pull from this facility is about 9,000 pieces. So that's a lot of plants to pick in one day. But we're set up for it. We've set up conveyors, stations where we're doing boxing and assembly, and we'll bring in 25 people and we'll just go to town packing lilies.
What would be kind of your ideal lily? What do you think that it should look like?
I think this is a great one. So here we are, we're about 20 days out from Easter today. And so anything with this kind of a bud for sure will certainly make Easter at a 68 or 70 degree average daily temperature. These will be a little bit sooner. So, this would be about as big a plant or a mature plant as we want to ship at this point. Now that changes, as we get closer to Easter.
And then how do you recommend people, when they buy an Easter lily or take it home, how do you recommend they care for it in their home?
Well, remember, Easter lilies are driven by temperature. So if you want to advance the flowering and open a few more flowers quickly, you put it in your warmest spot in your house. And if you want to settle it down and slow things down, put it in a cooler room in your house and the plant will respond almost instantaneously.
We used to recommend that the homeowner pick out the anthers and the pollen to make the blooms last longer. Do you do that, or have you heard about that too?
Any open blooms that we encounter when we ship, we pull the anther. It also, when that pollen starts to get powdery, it'll mess up the flower, right? It'll smear in the throat of the lily, and it'll kind of look a little unsightly. And so we generally pull them out. I think it's a good idea. I'm just so fired up. Easter lily, the scent and smell of Easter lilies is so pungently wonderful that it's my favorite time of the year in the greenhouse.
So can people plant the Easter lilies outside after the holiday?
Oh, sure. Yep. Naturally, just let them kind of go in, dormant, and the foliage is going to kind of darken up. Mm-hmm. And when the foliage is kind of darkened down, you could certainly cut them off. Maybe cut them off at 6 or 8 inches. Plant them in the ground. It may take a year or two before they bloom again, but they will bloom. Mm-hmm.
Now, I've had good luck with them actually blooming if I plant them on the east side of a building, and blooming again in September. Oftentimes, depending on where we're at, they may not make it through the winter, but at least, you can get some bloom out of them outside again, too.
There's two things that kind of factor there. One is that the bulb is completely spent of energy and really needs to develop some more energy to bloom again. The second thing is the vernalization process that it's going to be required again, and it may take a year or two for that to really happen. Now, there's Zone 4 hardy. And so if you've got any kind of mulch or organic matter on the top of the soil, eastern side of your house may be a bit more protected, I think you stand a pretty good chance.
You've grown a lot of Easter lilies, but are there other kinds that you grow as well?
Oh, sure. For Easter spring season, we do a lot of Asiatic lilies, and this would be a good example of an Asiatic lily. Come in all kinds of different colors. This is Tiny Invader Orange, that's the variety. This is a little bit different from one big Easter lily bulb. These are 3 smaller bulbs, and you can see the 3 shoots. But yellows, pinks, lavenders, oranges, yellows, just great colors for Easter.
So are these different to grow than the white Easter lily?
Yeah, we don't go through the vernalization process with these, and so and these are a little more programmable. And so we've got these down to this variety in itself is about a 64-day response group. So others are 68 or 70. And so we can back up those many days off Easter. And if we run a 55-night, 65-day, which is really ideal culture for Asiatics, we can hit that bloom time pretty reliably and regularly with a lot less difficulty than Easter lilies.
Are you seeing the demand for the colored lilies increasing or pretty steady, or how does that compare to the white?
We see it increasing. And really the hybridization and the quality of Asiatics that we're growing today is so much better than it was 5 years ago. That's made them a lot longer lasting in the house. So it's a great landscape lily as well, but now the genetics have improved to the point where it's a little more home friendly.
Can you plant these outside also?
Oh, absolutely. And they are zone 3 hardy and they will come back reliably.
When you put these outside, can you put them into a more open spot since they are a little hardier? And can they take full sun?
They can take full sun. I'd still, recommend for the home gardener, mulching over them in the fall with plenty of organic matter. We have such a variability of snowfall. If we have a bunch of snow, no problem. If we have a windswept area, very little snow, cold temperatures, trouble.
Yep.
So,
and we never know what we're going to get.
You never know what you're going to get. Yeah.
That's right. Well, besides lilies, what other kinds of spring holiday plants do you grow?
Chrysanthemum's been a traditional plant that we've done for years and years and years. Again, a very programmable plant. Pretty good performer for dark weather Midwest growing in the greenhouse.
Okay.
And hydrangeas. And we're doing a lot more hydrangeas than we ever have in a lot more bigger sizes. For instance, this is like in a 3-gallon pot. Actually, we started this from an unrooted cutting last May. And so we've almost a year of cycle time in something like this. But you got to admit, it's just a spectacular plant.
It is beautiful. I'm going to go back to the mums, though. Usually I think of mums in the fall. So do you have to light them differently in order to trick them into blooming in the spring?
Sure. We'll start, this year we started these in December. We'll go through a rooting phase, which we've got 20 hours of daylight, or 20 hours of artificial light on them. And up to where we pinch them, we bulk them up, and we use a little more bulking time under the lower light intensity that we have. And then we'll finish them under natural short days, which we have in the months of February and early March, for Easter date such as we have this year.
What do you mean by bulking up? Is that kind of like a person going to the gym and working out, or?
We think of growing plants in a couple different phases, or at least I do. One is rooting the plant out, initiating the flower, building the plant up with vegetative growth before we trigger the flowering response in the plant. And so when I say bulking up, I mean after we pinch, we're still under long days. Before we set the flowers in that plant, we need the plant up to a specific size or quality level. And so that's kind of what I mean there. And so we'll do that with 18 or 20 hours of daylight. We'll do it with good nutrition, and we'll do it with the right temperatures.
Okay, so that kind of creates the nice body for the plants.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, let's go back to the hydrangeas. Are these different than the hydrangeas that we plant outside in the landscape?
They are. This variety is Merit, and is a great indoor performer. There's a lot of really good hydrangeas for Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, the Midwest that are really nice summer performers. Varieties are a little bit different, but the growth process is very the same. The flowering mechanisms are the same. But this is something that we started from a cutting almost a year ago, so it's a long haul process.
I think most of us are familiar with the Annabelle and some of those varieties of hydrangeas, so they're probably cousins, but they are a different species.
Yep, they sure are.
So how should the homeowner treat these in order to get as long of a life out of them as they can?
Well, something like this, again, is going to be influenced by temperature. The warmer the temperature, the faster the flowers are going to open. I think these when they dry, they're real pretty too. So I think after the blooms have kind of spent, I think you could cut them and let them dry down. But then you can plant this in the garden, and I would say your chances are 50-50. It'll come back.
Generally, I know at least with azaleas, and maybe hydrangeas are that too, that they somewhat like it a little bit cooler. And so if somebody wanted to try to rebloom some of these in the house, would they have a difficult time doing that?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible.
Okay, so they'd be much better off putting them outside.
Correct.
Okay.
Take your chances.
All right. I see that you have some beautiful pansies here too, which, oh, they're always a sign for spring.
So we get late Easters. We sell a lot more pansies than with early Easters. But pansies and violas in color bowls, small pots, that's kind of one of the first leading things in bedding plants that we come back with. So after Easter is wound up, we are right in the bedding plant perennial business for spring. Of course, the pansy season kind of floats in between the early spring and Easter most years.
Are they frost tolerant? Like if we get a frost after you're done enjoying them out inside on your table and you set them out on the steps, do people have to worry about that if we get a cold night?
Yes and no. When they come out of the greenhouse, the growth is fairly soft. And so I think it's one of those things where you want to enjoy it at Easter, during your holiday, stick it on your front steps, but just be a little careful at night. If the temperatures drop down, I think pull it in, stick it back out in the morning, and I think you could really, especially in the upper Midwest like we are, get a lot of value from things like pansies, because it's not just a spring thing. They're beautiful right into June, and if you've got a cool spot, the genetics have improved so much that they're just a whole lot better than they were a few years ago.
I always think they have such little smiling faces that are so...
And there's a lot of types. And if you notice, these, typical pansy look, but these are actually violas. The flowers on the violas have gotten so much bigger that, I think they're mistaken in the market for pansies most of the time.
Okay, so kind of what's the difference between the pansies and the violas?
We used to grow all kinds of pansies and very few violas. Now we're growing all kinds of violas and very few pansies because the pansy flower, the viola flowers have got so much bigger and they throw up so many more flowers.
The pansies are so beautiful, but what is this other holiday plant that you have here that you grow?
This is a cineraria, and this is the Sinetti brand. It started by a seed. We started real early in the season. It fills out great pots, great big planters like this, as well as like 6-inch pots. So a nice plant for spring, a nice plant we sell a few at Easter. But this is one of our first kind of patio pot offerings into the end of April.
When do you have to start the seed in order to get this to be so beautiful?
Middle of December.
Wow.
So it's a fairly rapid growing plant, but just lots of color. Again, it's an F1, so you just get a giant canopy of color.
F1?
F1 hybrid.
Okay, very good. Well, and I see all of the bloom buds on here. I would bet that this blooms for a long, long time.
With hundreds and hundreds of flowers.
Wow. Again, if a homeowner has this in their home, how should they treat it?
It's a great porch step plant. It's a great deck plant. It's an outside plant. It needs some pretty high quality light. So I think it's one of those things where if you picked one up early in the season from your favorite garden center, you'd enjoy it on your front steps, maybe be a little bit leery at night when the temperatures are predicting frost, pull it in, and then stick it back in the morning.
I have a question. I'm thinking about getting a carnivorous plant. Which one do you suggest?
One of the most readily available carnivorous plants is probably the Venus flytrap. I mean, I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. But a lot of people probably get them home and they're not really quite sure how to take care of them. So basically, one of the most important things is that they are constantly wet. So you kind of have to have them in a tray of water, maybe a ½ inch of water, never really let it dry out. And that kind of promotes this moss growth too. The kind of water they have to have is distilled water, so it can't have really any minerals in it. So it either has to be distilled bottled water or rainwater. You can't really use tap water on your Venus flytrap when you take it home. But yeah, no fertilizer, any kind of fertilizers or anything like that would burn the roots and the plant would ultimately die from that. This is the only one only kind of carnivorous plant that actually moves. So you've got the trap and you've got these little guard hairs inside the trap, and if a bug lands in there and touches, it has to touch at least 2 of these guard hairs, but when it does, it'll quickly trap the insect inside, and then it takes maybe about 4 or 5 days for the plant to digest what's inside that bug, and then it'll slowly open up and the exoskeleton will be inside there and the wind or whatever will blow it away. But they need pretty much, like I said, a lot of moisture and full sun. Whenever you read about them, it says that they need full sun, but But there's a danger to putting them in the full sun because they can actually overcook, they overheat. So maybe a partial shade, so it's a little bit cooler, it doesn't overheat, but as much sun as possible. And when they have a lot of sun, you get these nice red colorations in them as well.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
Well, with all these beautiful spring flowers that you grow, how do you find all the labor in order to grow it?
Well, we've got an amazing, talented staff here, Park Rapids and Minneapolis, but we do use a lot of seasonal help. And so one of our most successful programs is working with international college students that we bring in. And this year we're hosting 42, in fact. And they're from all over. They're from the Ukraine, they're from Moldova, they're from Brazil, they're from Haiti, Vietnam, Panama, and a host of other countries. And so really what they've got in common is the English language. They're all enrolled in college courses. Most of them are 3 years into a bachelor degree. A lot of them have master's degrees already. We've had students that have been PhD students, and they're here for 7 to 9 months working with us in the greenhouse. They work in all facets of the business, and it's just been a terrific help. We just made some phenomenal friends. I think over the years we've hosted close to 400 now, but it's a big part of our program.
Do you use robots at all for your spacing or for gathering the plants?
We do at our facility in Minneapolis. Here we do so many different things that we just haven't found the right application. But we do use robots to transplant our bedding plants. We use robots to bunch stuff on carts and for bringing material in and out of the greenhouse. Now there are actually robots that will do spacing of individual pots in the greenhouse. We haven't gone that far, but we're looking at those things. So it's some pretty revolutionary stuff for an old industry like this.
The robots can't water or anything yet, can they?
Well, yeah, with watering booms, irrigation booms, that are all voice controlled or controlled by a barcode. In essence, they are watering the plants.
But they probably can't water a lot of these holiday plants because don't they require more specialized care?
Most of our Easter lilies, chrysanthemums are all growing on flood floors, and so everything is sub-irrigated. So actually we don't do a lot of overhead watering on those crops.
Oh, okay, that should help with disease control.
It should, yeah, yes it does, and uniformity.
Well, this has been just a very, very interesting time to learn about all of the holiday flowers. Thank you so much for allowing us to come and learn.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yekel Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org.